Recorded on October 17th, 2012 in front of a live internet audience. This week's Design Chat is brought to you by Vocal. It's the simplest and best way to hold live video chats. Sign up for your free account at vocal.com and go live today. And by 32loud.com. It's a place where those who make it all possible, the fans, can celebrate their passions and rivalries and enjoy the perks that come along with being part of the biggest team in NFL history. 32loud.com.
Hello and welcome to Design Chat, the best live design discussion on the internet. I'm your host, Ryan McGovern. On Twitter, I'm at Ubajube and at Design Chat. Every once in a while, we get together with some of the coolest people from the design community and chat. This week, we're talking to Samantha Warren, the @Samantha Toy on Twitter. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
You recommended, again, this is another recommendation from Mitch Goldstein, a.k.a. Angry Paul Rand, as he was known for a short period of time. So thank you, Mitch.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mitch.
And as soon as he sent the name, I was like, Google, yep, send, let's do this. Okay, so on July 2nd, you started working with Twitter in their design group. Prior to that, you were working for a group named Phase 2. I believe you were out of DC for a little while too. Now you're in San Francisco.
Yes.
Outside of those things, can you, for people who are not familiar with you and your work, give a little intro about who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Well, that's a lot right there, actually. So working backwards, I'm currently a designer at Twitter. I work with the Twitter design team to project the Twitter brand outward, specifically online for their web presence, which will includes their blogs and other online properties. Previously, I worked at Phase 2 Technology as their design director, where we worked on a lot of large-scale systems, design systems specifically, that handled large customers like publishing, government. I did a lot of work that basically worked on publishing cycles or handled a lot of content. And specifically worked a lot with content management systems, open source content management systems such as Drupal. So in doing that, I had worked pretty hard to define a specific process for how we worked with those customers. And I came up with, I to some degree evolved my process to use a tool called a style tile, which has a website now, and I speak at a lot of conferences and such for that. So I talk a lot about style tiles. And before that, there was just a lot, so. But I was originally a print designer, and I made the transition from print to web. And so I've been doing web design now for about 8 years.
So that's always an interesting topic of conversation because we hear it a lot. You know, having traditionally been trained as a print designer, and then maybe discovering it afterwards or dabbling in it in college, and then taking on some jobs and learning, and then failing and figuring things out. Talk a little bit about your transition or adaptation of the digital world, you know, through your design eyes.
Yeah, so I went to school at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia, which I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's a small liberal arts school that has a really great design program with some pretty passionate instructors. And I went to school for print design because my father owned a printing company. So it was something I grew up with all my life. I've always known I wanted to be a designer. That's awesome. And my mom also, she went to art school. She for fashion illustration. So it's been something in my family since I can remember, really. And so when I went to school, I had an instructor, Don Hachensky, who was very passionate about typography, and that sort of got me rolling on a portion of my career where I've really worked a lot in discovering web typography specifically. But so after school, this amazing thing happened to me that I never thought would happen to me, and that is I got this great job doing museum exhibit design in Richmond, Virginia. And then I lost it. And what happened when I lost my job then was, it was a blessing, because I wasn't really into museum and exhibit design. There were so many aspects of it that didn't really resonate with the type of person I am. I love looking at museum exhibit design. I have a great respect for it, but it wasn't right for me. And so I did something that everyone advised me not to do, and that was I started temping. And it actually was an amazing experience for me to start to get a feel for what I did like. And so I tempted about 5 or 6 companies in the Richmond, Virginia area right out of school. And I got a good sense of what I liked. I kind of landed at this one agency where I was doing some web work, and I received a call from someone I had gone to school with, and he had told me that he had hired developers and tried to teach them how to design, but he was going to hire a designer and teach them how to develop. And I knew right there that that was the opportunity I needed to take, and it was a bit of a boot camp, but my first 3 years after that in web design was pretty rough. But I had a very fortunate opportunity at that period of time when there wasn't a lot of places I could go to learn this stuff, that I was surrounded by people who wanted to teach me. And they did it in a really amazing way. This gentleman, Donnie Steele, who hired me, he would have me design my Photoshop prompts, sit down and show me how to code it. He'd code it, and then he would delete it all and say, "You do it now." Ugh. And we would do this over and over and over. It was sort of a hard way to learn, but in the end, it worked out really well.
We're going to pause the chat for a second. Our producer is telling us that your audio is a little hot. So on the left side of your screen, there's a button that says Setup, and I'm going to have you click that and turn your microphone down a little bit.
Okay. Actually, it won't let me hit Setup.
Really?
Yeah, it's grayed out.
You can't click on it at all?
No, I can see it, but it's definitely grayed out.
Okay, well in that case, your audio is very good, so you don't have to project as much as you normally would talking to web chats.
I'll whisper.
Okay.
I just saw Seth Godin speak, and he told me to whisper, so I shall.
Who said that?
Seth Godin.
He told you.
Are you
to whisper?
familiar? Yes.
Yeah. So you met him recently?
He spoke at Brooklyn Beta, a design conference in New York that I just attended, and he was definitely by far one of my favorite speakers. But he talks a lot about whispering to your audience.
It's very intense when you whisper. You have to enunciate everything.
Yes.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I would love to see him speak sometime. He's written a bunch of really interesting books. The last one had an orange cover, and I'm forgetting the title of it. I know I read about 1/3 of it, and I'm just a bad reader, so I haven't finished it. I can't remember the name of it. I'll get back to that in a second. But no, you couldn't be more right, in knowing to jump at that opportunity where someone was willing to help train you in learning how to code. And I'm always really interested in the sort of your patterns of thought, right? Because when you're thinking about design and you're in the early stages and you're concepting, a lot of people like to sort of have free range thinking for a while, and once they get some ideas out there on paper, they start connecting dots, and that's where the magic happens, right? But with coding, it seems like there's a different mode, right, where you have to pre-plan logistically every single step, and you don't really get to sort of sketch it out all the time. You can sketch out rough concepts, but once you start programming, it's a completely different language. So talk a little bit about the mental process that you have to go through in changing modes from creative to code.
Well, I don't do it as much anymore, mostly because I work with large-scale CMSs, and you can see the cat behind me now at this point. Because I work mostly with large-scale CMSs, I don't do as much markup in CSS as I used to. But what I do and I've actually changed my process over a period of time. I think the interesting thing about the way the web has evolved and education about the web has evolved is that a lot of us sort of learn by just getting in there and doing it and making things work. But once there was enough information about how to construct your markup in a way that was meaningful, I started to understand a better way to do it. And a lot of times what I'll do is I have at times sat down and made an outline of my content, and then really build the HTML first, and then layer in the styles later. Layer up depending, go in, do colors, do fonts. A lot of times I do my typography first. But I think of it in terms of really taking the root of the information and then how am I going to present it. So that's interesting that's the way I do it now, because it was so different than how I did it before. It was more like really kind of thinking in terms of layout, which is how a designer's trained to think, is spatially. You kind of think, okay, I'm going to make this thing be here to the left, and then I'm going to make this thing next to it, and then I'm going to make this thing next to it. But what I find really works for me is to think about it holistically, think about the entirety of what you're building and how everything relates to each other, and laying it down in layers of content, what's alike, like things, buttons, anything that's going to be consistent, trying to mix together and styling them at the same time so that you don't continuously kind of get these things that are kind of alike in your code but aren't exactly alike, and layering up.
I want to hear more about style tiles, because it's, from what I understand of seeing it, and the website, which is STYLETIL.ES. I believe there's a link to it, or there will be in the chat in a second. It's a tool that helps you in your pre-planning stages, right? It's before you really dig into any coding. It's a design tool, but it's also a logistics tool. So if I'm brand new to it, from the designer's perspective, how would I use it?
Well, the great thing about it is that you can use it for lots of different reasons. It sort of was the tool that came to me to solve numerous problems. One was I was having a hard time communicating with my clients. Just out the gate, like talking with them about what they cared about, what was interesting to them, because you can talk about your goals and your content, but at the end of the day, something as simple as, I don't like that blue can completely just stop an entire project. And so I needed to get that stuff out of the way earlier in the process, so that we weren't kind of guessing and completely holding up other pieces that were really important to serving user goals further down in the process. So that was one reason. Another reason was just really trying to make sure that I was being more efficient. I felt that there was a lot of time being wasted in doing 3 different mock-ups right out the gate before our client had even seen anything. It was just, I would add up these numbers in my mind, and I've seen these projects go over budget, and people say, well, we really, really went over budget on this. And add up the hours spent on all of the stuff that was thrown away that the client didn't even need to see, and it seemed to fill in those gaps. So when you're being really scrappy, especially coming from working in government, nonprofits, publishing, those are clients who are working on a shoestring budget. I needed a way to sort of make the process more efficient. But then the last one was really this idea of the responsive web and responsive web design, building systems. As the web is progressing and as we as designers are taking on bigger challenges, we're not just designing marketing sites anymore. There's, maybe a marketing site that's part of a larger system. Maybe a publication, a magazine or a newspaper, it's growing, it's constantly evolving and changing, and there's this content that's filtering in and out of it, and things have to work systematically. And so there needed to be a way to communicate with my clients and my team that separated this idea of the page versus the system. And this was like a really great deliverable right out of the gate that I could show people and talk to people about to solve problems without getting them really attached to this idea of there being a page. And so those are 3 reasons for I started using them, but it really evolved from a process of, I've done lots of mock-ups and comps, and those are the problems I was having. I've also done things like mood boards. And what I was finding with that is that, again, working in some of the verticals that I've been working in, like publications, nonprofits, any company that has already gone through a branding process, mood boards were just a little too vague to really communicate with a client. Because, if you're saying, how does this make you feel? Well, hey, they already have been through this process. A lot of these clients knew that. They have a logo. They need to know how they feel online. So making sure we're really talking in terms of buttons, fonts, things that they're going to actually see in a website and making that connection. So did I answer your question?
Completely.
Okay.
I want to talk a little bit more about phase 2. They described themselves as a web application development. I screwed up my notes. That they provide web application development.
Yeah.
And so when I first read this, in my head, I pick, and I can, my head goes to weird places, so slap me if I'm wrong. It sounds like that's a group that takes on clients. The client may have preconceived ideas about what they want their web applications to do, and then you are, a guide through that process, and you're actually doing the work to make the web application come to life. Is that correct?
Yeah. I think application still, it's kind of hard because we did so many different types of sites. I mean, essentially, we made large websites, really large websites.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, that's a lot of times it is coming in and sort of building the structure for what a larger website would be.
So when I start thinking about business relationships and the need to create these large digital environments, the first thing, and maybe it's because I'm a jaded designer and I've been working too long and I know too much about how business actually happens. My first thought is, it really seems like the business world isn't catching on the way we thought they might. The way we thought this next generation of business people would, because they grew up in a sort of, albeit an 8-bit, digital age. They grew up with video games. They grew up with early stages of programming. And we all assumed that the business world would be, I did anyway, more savvy at this point about how these processes work, why they work, what the actual applications are, not what applications, but how it actually happens. What's your perspective on, how savvy or unsavvy the business world is at this point in dealing with creating these digital environments?
Well, that's really hard to say. I've had clients all over the map. It depends. It really just depends. And going in, you kind of have to sort of ask just a lot of questions to find out where they are, take a temperature on what their understanding is, and start from there. I've had clients who were in the traditional news business who've been incredibly savvy, much savvier than I thought they would be. And then I've had other clients who have been in online, like have been online for quite some time and not been as savvy as I expected. So it's sort of really going in not expecting anything. I wish, of course, I mean, as a designer, I wish the business world would kind of focus more on what happens online. My sister is actually going to school right now for her MBA, and we have these conversations quite often, actually. We have these conversations where we talk about what is the return on investment for something like this. How do you prove the worth of, something as simple as a design? Why would one site make me more money? Why is it worth my time to spend money to make it look beautiful? And why does it matter if it's you versus someone who's right out of school or maybe even a college student? Or, hey, why can't I go to 99 Designs? Those are the conversations we have quite a lot. And the only real weapon that we have against that is just stats, statistics, and paying attention to what we're doing and the impact we're making and documenting it. I think we don't do that as much as we should as a industry, really kind of proving ourselves. We sort of expect this respect, but the truth of the matter is, unfortunately, there isn't a lot of understanding and education about what the impact we could make. And I would love to see organizations like AIGA, Art Directors Club, there's just so many out there, like really banding together to create those documents, that information for us to have armed at our disposal for us to make those cases. And I mean, of course, like we can have that stuff as an industry, but we can also have it as individuals and businesses. So I work really hard to try and keep that information. Sometimes your clients don't want that shared. I've had clients where we made a dramatic impact just on their sales. And they said, you know, please, we're so embarrassed. We can't believe that that this made such an impact. And I'm like, no, this is great. Like, you should want people to know. And they're like, they get this, they feel like maybe like they don't want people to know that they weren't doing it right before, but it's out there and it exists. And so making these cases, presenting quite often like your work, your findings, taking a bit more of a scientific approach to how we deal with design, and doing it regularly, working it into our process so it doesn't feel like a chore, like something we have to do at the end.
I want to pause to remind the audience, for people who have not been here before, we love it when you guys ask questions. There's the chat room that you guys can ask questions, and we don't always see that, but there is a red Ask a Question button on the side there, and you can do it two ways. You can either type it in and submit it as a text question, or if you've got a web camera, you can get on camera and be part of the chat. I highly encourage that. We do this almost every week, and we get design rock stars like Samantha Warren to spend time with us, and it's like a little design conference every week. You get to pick their brain. So take the opportunity, ask a question, participate in the chat. Please, please, please do that. The other thing I want to mention real quick before we move on, I was remiss to not mention it yet. This is the first live chat that we've done with our new logo. Ta-da! This is the new DesignChat logo. We're moving away. There's one in the upper left-hand corner that you can see the older logo. We need to update this page. But our website has been revamped. Thank you to Andrew Tibbetts, who is our producer in the background. So find him on Twitter and thank him. And what else? So the Twitter, the Facebook, all that. And big announcement, if you didn't see it on Twitter and Facebook already, there is now an audio-only version of iTunes of the podcast that you can subscribe to on iTunes. The link isn't on the site yet, but if you search DesignChat on iTunes, you'll see the video and the audio feed. You can subscribe to either, if you know, whatever your preference is. So please take advantage of that, guys. Announcements. Okay, it's 8:30. We got half an hour left with Samantha, so let's make the most of it. Let's start talking about Twitter. You made a post on your awesome URL, by the way, for your badassideas.com. Congratulations for getting that URL, first of all. And
that was a long time ago. That's why it is the URL it is.
I mean, come on, badassideas.com. I mean,
before I knew all of the slide decks I would have to put that on, and portfolio reviews I'd have to put it on. That's when I bought that URL, so that's why it is what it is.
It's badass. So on there, on your blog, you mentioned July 2nd that you were going to start a new position with Twitter. So I'd like to hear a little bit about how that relationship formed. You know, was it a job that you saw and you applied for, or did you know somebody? What's the relationship?
So I moved out to San Francisco about a year ago. I worked for Phase 2 remotely for 9 months. I absolutely loved working there. It was a wonderful team, an amazing group of people. We were doing things that really mattered, making a great impact. However, I am not a person for working in an office by myself, like without any people around me. Me and the cat just got weird. Me and the cat just got a little weird. So I knew that I needed to find a place that I could work amongst really creative people. I wanted to learn a lot. from an incredibly smart team. And so I started looking based on that. I started looking at what teams would I want to work with, and what is it that they're doing that I feel like really matters. And as you can probably tell if you go to look at my Twitter page, I use Twitter a lot. I mean, I love Twitter. It's actually a product, or it's weird calling it a product. It's actually like a place that I feel very passionately about, because I've met so many wonderful people and made so many great connections through it. So I knew immediately that that would be a place I'd want to look. And I browsed to their site. I saw that they were hiring designers, and I knew a friend who actually used to work in DC, who was an engineer there, built Couch. So I reached out to him, and actually I asked him, it's like, hey, look, I see this and I love Twitter. Do you know anything about whether or not there would be a good fit for me there? And because he's an engineer, he invited me in for lunch with some designers. I met some of the design team, and from there it really just felt like a natural fit, talking with the other folks there, what they cared about, and the fact that just Twitter matters so much to me.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really awesome. So what I'm really curious to hear about is the atmosphere, you know, from the designer's perspective. You know, I've worked freelance jobs, you know, side jobs at home, at agencies, in-house. You know, there's lots of different types of jobs that you can have, but, you know, it really seems like, you know, the Twitter, anything social media, is an entirely new category, you know, for creative people.
Yes.
Not only, you know, from the visual aspect, but from the interactive aspect. So what I'm really curious about is the overall sort of creative atmosphere of the team that you're on.
Yeah, it's definitely different than any place I've ever worked before, which, as we discussed earlier, I've worked quite a few places. I mean, it's this unique blend of technical. There's a lot of engineers, but it's also in-house kind of, and then it's also sort of media driven as well. I mean, Twitter to some degree is now, I mean, it's social media. And so it's a very large team. There's about 40 designers in the design team, but they all have specializations. And there's just, it blows my mind the amount of creativity, the experience, just how incredibly talented the people I work with are. And so it's kind of hard to really say. It's not like any place I've ever worked before. It's my first fear sort of going into working at a place that wasn't client services was, you know, what's it going to be like not working with clients? But what I found was there's really quite a few clients. I mean, there's clients internally, and if you work in-house, you probably kind of know this already, but being that it's a larger tech company, there's a lot of clients, and it sort of takes a new approach to how do I adapt my process to working with the people who are working with me, but also working for something that they're trying to achieve too. So, because there's lots of different goals and there's lots of different objectives, but the overall atmosphere is incredible. It's really just very different than anything I've ever experienced before. There's just tons of creativity all around. It's great because there's so much learning, and there's just so much. There's a great willingness for everybody to sort of chip in and discuss things. We have these really great design tea times where we get together and we share what we're doing with each other, and we'll also have design office hours where we kind of go around and weigh in on each other's work and just chat with each other about what we're doing. So there's a really nice balance of collaboration, but also sort of getting what you're doing done. Because we have videographers on the team, animators. There's people who do just all sorts of things. So there's plenty of stuff to learn constantly.
You know, and it seems like the company as a whole, you know, if you take a survey of 50 US-based companies, right? The percentage of those companies that are going to seem to have good, you know, taste, visual taste, design taste, culture taste, you know, you're going to get maybe 5 companies out of those 50, maybe. And these are actual numbers, right? I'm making them up. No, it's just my perception of you know, the types of companies I've been involved in anyway. It seems like somewhere, you know, 5 out of 50 companies that will actually, you know, have a really good sense of design, a respect for design, and Twitter is definitely one of those. You know, with the new logo update that came out this last year, and then, you know, the following blog posts and information that came out about the process of that logo and how they constructed it, why it existed, how it's implemented. There's a very strong presence there. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, it's hard for me to really compare it because I think that was a major piece of my criteria when I was looking for a place. You know, where would I go that has a really strong respect for design? And Twitter was definitely at the top of the list. It was actually, I was looking before I knew about the logo redesign at all, even. So that wasn't even something that had kind of come onto my radar at that point. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to say because there are companies that have different levels of respect for design, and I feel that just in the fact that they have made the effort to establish such a large design team, they have made some pretty amazing hires. There's really talented people on the team. You know, you don't necessarily have to understand design. You just need to trust designers, right? And so there are people within the organization, they see the value in design, and they have a lot of trust for the design team. And so that, I think, is pretty apparent in the application itself and where they're moving online.
The question was asked in the chat room, is there anything online, you know, since you've been working there, it's only been like 4 months, we know. Is there anything, you know, that's been published that we can see that are projects that you've worked on or been a part of?
No, so I've been working on a very large project that will be ongoing, and there's nothing online yet. It will be rolling out in the future.
And it's super secretive.
Yeah, no, I think it's something that everybody will see, and it'll make a great impact on the way Twitter communicates with the world.
It's got to be frustrating. I mean, we talked a little bit about this earlier, how with an organization like Twitter, there are certain topics that you can discuss publicly and certain topics that you really need to stay away from just because it's in the best interest of the company and that sort of thing. But as a creative and as a designer, you know, as a professional who's making things, there's an inherent want, a desire to share that with friends as it's being developed, you know, and I would imagine there's a pretty serious clampdown at Twitter. Don't show it, don't talk about it, don't acknowledge it. If you do, you're done.
No, I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think that there's a lot of people interested in what we're doing. Almost on a scale that I've never really experienced. I've worked for a large-scale ad agency before, and the amount of attention that anything I did there doesn't really necessarily even equal the stuff that I'm working on at Twitter. So I think it's more along the lines of we're experimenting, and people have experimented and shared, and then that leads to rumors and suspicion and like lots of crazy stuff. So it's not that we're not interested in sharing. I think it's just more that there's an aspect of this kind of crazy repercussion, these crazy repercussions that happen when we do talk about it. So and I think, you know, as any organization, we reserve the right to want to put the best product out there and the best design out there, and so making sure that that comes through in the end.
Right.
But it is. I mean, it's hard. It's it's hard. I love Dribble, and I think that there's a lot of stuff we would love to show. But it's. I mean, to some degree, it's also up to me to what could go out. And I think from my perspective, I would love to just see everything kind of go out holistically, so people can understand the context of what's happening.
Mm-hmm. You know, you hear all these rumors with companies like Apple, you know, and Facebook, you know, all of which, and Twitter, I mean, you know, have this very sort of, I don't know, there's just a strong desire within the design community and communities at large to really know what's coming next, because they're the groups who are doing the most exciting things, right? So, you know, it's like watching a good episode of Dexter, and they give you a little cliffhanger at the end. You kind of think you know something, you think you know where it's going, but you don't totally know until it shows up. You know, and we've got another instance of that. I think on Tuesday, Apple's going to have an event they've invited a bunch of media to, and it's widely speculated that there's going to be a smaller version of the iPad. But the thing is, you never know until it actually happens. I'm curious to know about the sort of digital environment within the doors of Twitter, like the devices that are used. They're encouraged, to be used. The type of almost the digital play atmosphere.
As far as, you mean, like, does everybody have iPhones, or like how exactly?
What are the favorite tools? What are the favorite mechanisms? What are what's encouraged by the company?
Well, I think what's encouraged by the company is to do the best work that you can possibly do, and whatever tools you need to make that happen is what they basically encourage. So, I mean, as a design team, we use Photoshop quite a bit. A lot of people prototype. It's whatever really gets, however you do your best design work. So I wouldn't say it's any different really than any place I've worked before, where there's a lot of Apple nerds. There's also a lot of people who are into quite a bit more extensive technology than that. I mean, everybody doesn't just have an iPhone. There's quite a bit of diversity, mostly because, I mean, Twitter, the product, is used around the world on lots of different devices. So there's quite a bit of that. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's much different than any place I've ever been before as far as like a studio. There's, designers love their toys, and there's quite a bit of them, and there's no real set way of doing anything as long as you're doing your best work.
You mentioned, I'm going to rewind all the way to the beginning. It's something that's been ringing in my head, that your dad had a print shop growing up, and yeah, that was one of your first introductions into design. I just want to hear about that. What type of print shop was it? What type of work did they do? What are your favorite memories from being around a print shop as a kid?
Yeah, so I did a lot of pre-press work. My dad was pretty awesome in the fact that he didn't let me off the hook. I did a lot of stuff that probably I may not have been that interested in, but served me really well. I was actually talking with someone recently who had worked on the earlier versions of Photoshop, and like I remember when we got like the first version of Photoshop, and my dad was like, "You need to learn this," and I just sat there, like, I think it was like 2 parrots, and I was like photoshopping a 3rd parrot into the picture. So those are the types of things that really stick out in my memory. I was probably, gosh, I mean, I think it was in the 6th grade that he opened the shop. So I mean, all of my middle school and high school weekends, some nights, did a lot of collating. I did a lot of bookbinding. But some of the things that were really interesting to me were just learning from how he ran a company, actually, and how he treated his employees. And it set a really good precedent for me to know that relationship and how that should work. My dad was really great at respecting people and making sure that they got what they needed to get what they could get done. And he was hard on folks, but that also produced a lot of great work and those folks were appreciative of it as well. So for me, that's a lot of what I got out of that experience. I mean, it was also tough too, because I was like, I wanted to go out with friends, I wanted to hang out. I didn't necessarily want to be collating at 9 o'clock at night sometimes. But I was exposed to some things that were really interesting and really just special. Especially, so the print shop was across the street from Virginia Commonwealth University, if you're familiar with that. It's in Richmond, Virginia. They have a great ad program, and it was at the infancy of their ad program that he opened, actually. And so I would see some amazing stuff that just, a 14, 15-year-old wouldn't normally see being produced, and like understanding, getting to talk to the people who were making it and what they wanted to do. So the whole experience was fantastic.
We've got some questions from the audience here. That Gary Holmes, who frequents the chat, has some good ones. Goofy question to start with. Were you instrumental in the fail whale illustration?
No, no, that was definitely long before I joined Twitter, and I believe that was someone before my time, and it was something that caught on quite well, but I had no influence there.
What's really great about that, that whole thing that happened was that it really showed the humor, that the inherent understanding that this is a new technology, things are going to go wrong, especially when it got so big so fast, and all of a sudden people from all over the world were using it as direct means of communication, and for them to take that stance of farewell, it kind of had this kind of cheeky little, we know it's messed up, we'll be back soon, it just had this great attitude about it.
Yeah, and I think that positivity is a lot, really still reflects quite a bit in the culture at Twitter too.
Right.
I'm going to turn on the light so it doesn't look like I'm in a cave. I didn't think about the fact the sun would be setting. So
the sun was going down. It looked like you're in a scary movie. We should have had you prepare lines from and recite lines from a scary movie. Let's tell ghost stories. Okay, we're going to remove that one. It's a copy, so I'm going to delete it. At Twitter HQ, do you correspond internally only via Twitter? Email?
No, no, I mean, some of my coworkers and I do use Twitter and DM quite a bit. We do, we communicate quite a bit through email. Gmail filters are amazing. I mean, I think in any big company you have to have some way to sort of fight the email overload, but there's a lot of great tools that they provide to sort of keep yourself organized and do a little bit of both. I think that one of the great things, though, about working at Twitter is the fact that your coworkers and colleagues, everybody around you, they're also on Twitter, and so you get to know more about them. You get to see, find out, stuff you may not find out about your colleagues if they weren't on Twitter, and so beyond the design team, even people in other departments, I love getting to know them better on Twitter.
It is this real sort of interesting cross-section of, public awareness of who people are. I'm going to take this one and drop it real quick. And it seems like we're still in the very early stages of learning how to express yourselves in a responsible manner, because there's definitely widespread use of just hate. And anytime somebody's mad about something, they use Twitter to just gripe about it, and it becomes this stream of just ugliness, right? But then you find these gems who are sharing things that they're learning as they learn them, that are giving interesting perspective on world views, world news even. A little bit. I'd like to hear a little bit about your perspective about how you discovered Twitter, how you decided to start using it, and what it means to you today.
Yeah, so my scenario is a little bit unique in the fact that I went to South by Southwest the year it sort of exploded. And so everyone at South by Southwest was talking about it. And to some degree, Twitter is a bit synonymous with South by for me, because what was happening was South by itself was a pretty miraculous thing. I found this community of people who, I sometimes describe it a little bit like, I feel like it's that the No Rain video where the little bumblebee all of a sudden is going, tap dancing around, and then the little bumblebee finds the entire field of bumblebees, and that's what South by Southwest felt like for me. There was all of these other people who were into design, who were into the web, and they loved it as much as I did, and it was amazing, and I connected with these people there. And then there was this fantastic tool to keep in touch with them, which was what Twitter started as for me. And it kind of, it sort of, I think everyone sort of has this discovery period with Twitter where they're like, I'm going to check this out, I'm going to try it a little bit, and then maybe they back off a bit, and then they rediscover it. at a point where they start to find the value in it and start to really get a cadence and find what works for them. You know, some people just use it to listen. Some people use it as an RSS feed. Some people use it to stay connected with people. And for me, it's all of that and above. Though it's perfectly fine for other people who don't want to talk, who don't want to tweet, to go on there and use it to just stay up with news or events. And so for me, Twitter became like sort of this way of keeping in touch with these people that I met up with once a year who loved the same things that I loved. And then it evolved into something just so much greater than that, where it was keeping up with people from around the world that I met when I got to go to conferences, to learning new things, getting into finding new interests, discovering new interests. Because when you get a group of people who all have this common thing as design, and then you start to find out, well, if this person likes design, well, I might also like, you know, some of the same food, or I might like the same hobbies as them. And you start to sort of find this cross-reference of like interest finding. And so I've actually met quite a few of my very good friends on Twitter at this point. For me, it's that. It's a place to go to connect with people when I want to just, you know, share something about these crazy posters I found. You know, I can't call up my mom or anybody I really went to high school with. I can't go on Facebook. There's just so many people in my life that I love very dearly, but they're not connected to me based on my interests. They're connected to me based on location or just you know, education or family ties. And Twitter's my way of connecting with people that have the same interests.
Can you remember one specific tweet that impacted your either personal life or professional life? One specific message that came from someone that changed the course of events for you?
Ooh, that's a tough one. There's definitely been a few tweets from people that I looked up to and admired. That, you know, people I've read their books, people that really felt very distant from me, and they've tweeted with me or tweeted at me or responded to me, and it's made me sort of realize how amazing the internet is, how amazing our industry is, and to some degree, it's also given me the courage to push forward and really believe in certain things that I do, because I see these people that made such an impact on me, who wrote this book that changed the way I viewed you know, HTML or whatever it is, and then they like something the same as me. Like they really dig the same you know, posters, or they really dig the same I mean, it could be food, just whatever, and then you're like, wow, you know, there's this aspect of us that's very similar. Actually, they're just like me. Like, holy crap! Like, there's something really inspirational about that. And I think that's, for me, that's been a major connecting point. And I'm trying to think. It's hard to really put my finger on one in particular, but there's the favorites functionality, which some people kind of use sparingly, but you can see if you check my favorites, I have maybe close to 1,000, maybe more. Actually, I haven't checked lately, but I favorite a lot of tweets. I mean, funny tweets are great. So many. There's actually one tweet that does stick out in my mind. It was by Jeffrey Zeldman, and he said something along the lines of Twitter is 1,000 people yodeling into a canyon. And that was early on when Twitter first came out, and I always got a kick out of that in particular, because it does sometimes feel like it's people yodeling into a canyon, but with the great surprise in it is when they yodel back. Like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. Holy cow, there's somebody there.
That's a brilliant analogy. I mean, this having you on the show tonight is like the culmination of what DesignChat has been, because not only like Twitter comes up constantly, because that's how, you know, I tend to communicate with people about the show, and sometimes book guests and that sort of thing. It started as, I say this almost every stupid episode, I'm sorry guys, it started as a hashtag-based chat for the first 13 weeks, it was 3 hours of just hashtag DesignChat. Question 1, what do you think about Comic Sans, right? And then people will be like, fuck Comic Sans, blah, 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 blah. And it was this great way to just reach out and interact and eventually reach out to these design rock stars that I've always admired and never talked to. So to completely echo your sentiments, yeah, I mean, that's exactly how I see it, and it's been used to make the show happen at all. So it's one of those, like, there's a lot of BS that comes with listening to everybody on the planet tweet everything that they're thinking, what they think people want to hear, and then, you know, the people who are really interesting and on the cutting edge and doing really interesting things. But it's one of the, like, without Twitter, DesignChat really wouldn't exist, I don't think. Maybe in some other form, but definitely not in the way that it happened, because, you know, that was the seed that, you know, grew the tree, right? So
Yeah.
it's just really cool to have a designer from Twitter on the show. It's like meta design chat. It's Inception chat. It's just amazing. So
Yeah. That's awesome to hear. I love hearing those stories like that. I love hearing just about, because it's different for everyone, and everything has a different story, and that's what's cool about it. There's no formula.
Totally. Funny question from Gary again. What's the reaction you get from family and friends when you tell them you work at Twitter?
I laugh because I think that as a designer, and my parents obviously, again, come from creative backgrounds, but it's just really mixed. But they're super surprised and excited. I think, you know, as you're growing up and things happen, you graduate from college, you do these things in your life that you feel are accomplishments, and my parents have always been really great to, like, congratulations and super supportive. But when I told them that I was getting a job at Twitter, they just freaked out. They were like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing thing. They were so excited and so just absolutely thrilled about it. So my parents, and I think a lot of it also comes down to the fact that they know that I love Twitter. They see it on TV. It just touches a lot of people, and that's actually what's so special about it for me, is it does. This is finally something my parents get to some degree. I've worked on some pretty big websites, and that I've been really proud of, and I've, like, pulled them up and showed them to them, and it wasn't until I said I worked at Twitter that they got super excited. But in general, family, friends, a lot of them say, wow, like, we're really excited, like, I'd like to try Twitter now. And so that's an interesting experience, like, hearing from them, you know, user, you know, like, what's it like being a user? What's it like signing up for the first time? What do you want to get out of this? So I really enjoy that aspect of things as well.
Maria from the chat room says, better yet, how do you explain to your grandma what you do?
It's my grandmother. That's a tougher one. I've been in this scenario. Specifically with Twitter, I don't have as much of a story there, like what I say for Twitter, but for what I do in general, I a lot of times compare it to advertising in television or communication in television, newspaper, making metaphors, that sort of thing. But there's this sense of, like, excitement and pride from those folks, but not necessarily, I don't know if they necessarily really understand. And I think, I mean, even with my parents, neither of them are on Twitter, they see me tweet, but we're working on connecting through Twitter on a different level. And it's a process. I mean, it works for some people.
Wow, that was the tease at the end of the Dexter episode that's going to make us tune in next time.
Nice.
Cool. Well, we're at the end of our hour. Samantha, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us, for sharing your insights and your stories about being at Twitter. Really inspirational. It's great to hear all those stories. Thank you for spending the time. Oh, well, we got a question. How did that get up there? Andrew, did you do that? Sorry. That's funny. So we're wrapping up, Mr. Oh, all right. Let's take the question. Dobelina, go ahead and ask your question in the chat room. We'll address it there. Waiting. Spinny circle. It's coming. It's not. Fail whale. What are your thoughts about Twitter's new developer display requirements?
Developer display requirements. What are my thoughts on it? And it's kind of hard to know exactly what that question means, but I think pretend you don't work there.
Right.
Well, I think it's really hard for me to pretend that I don't work there because I understand the benefits to the display requirements, and that's the fact that attribution is really important online. And it's a way that we're working to make sure attribution and people are linking back to who actually said things, so that you can find them and give them proper credit. So from my perspective, that's the big benefit to the display requirements, and I can see that pretty clearly, especially in the type of work that I've been doing with publications.
Good question. Dabellino, I believe his name was. Thank you for asking it. I'm looking up right now. Next week, we're talking to David Schwen. He's got a website at dschwen.com, DSHWEN.com. Check him out. We'll be speaking to him next, same bat channel, same bat time, 8 p.m. Central next week on Wednesday. Thank you guys, everybody in the chat room, for participating. Tell everybody you know about it, and let's grow this design community. And again, thank you one more time to Samantha, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Oh, yeah, everybody throw your Twitter name in the chat room, especially on this episode. I'm at Hoopajube and at DesignChat. Samantha is at Samantha Toy, T-O-Y.
My middle name.
Geographic. We've got Kristen, Maria Faye. Cool. I think that's it. All right, guys, we're in the chat. Good night. Bye. Keep the conversation going on Twitter with #DesignChat. Bye.